Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. I am joined by my rad co-host, Amy Hollenkamp.
Hey, everybody.
And today we are talking about stress as it relates to IBS, SIBO, and gut health, more broadly speaking. Now, Amy, I don't know if you would agree with this. Actually, I think I know if you would agree with this, but I'm going to say that anyway. Have you had cases in your clinical practice of clients or patients who seem to have a root cause of SIBO that is stress, where like nothing else really seems to be really relevant in the history, like no food poisoning, no PPI use, none of the other typical culprits? Have you seen that as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, stress affects the gut in so many different ways, negatively, pretty much all negatively.
Yeah,
Um, and it's something that tends to go under the radar because everyone's stressed in some capacity, and we sort of reward stress in our society, unfortunately. So
yeah,
a lot of times people aren't looking at that avenue. It seems so obvious sometimes too, where like people are like, "Oh yeah, I am like for sure stressed," but they're not connecting the dots of it being a big driver of their SIBO or their IBS.
mm-hmm.
And I also think there's pushback from what I've seen with clients and just kind of interacting with people in the SIBO IBS space of when they go to their doc, if the doc even mentions stress, there's sort of a pushback because it tends to be more of in a dismissive way of like, oh,
Exactly.
it's just like you're
You're just
stressed.
stressed. Get over it.
Yeah, exactly. So there is this underlying current of almost resistant to it being stress too, like wanting
Yeah,
something bigger and like, which managing stress is a huge animal to wrestle.
it is. That's the
So
hard work.
exactly, it's hard work, and I think there's some resistance to that too, of like, oh, you might need to like restructure some things around and put a lot of time and focus on this. And I think we are all programmed to not put time and energy into stress management. It's
Yeah,
almost seen as weakness in some way in our society, which is totally off base. It's not accurate. You have to be well rested, and your system has to not be in chronic stress response to function optimally. So it's a
well, I
weird.
think of it as the you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how I kind of imagine it
Yeah,
personally.
100%. And like, I also think there can be good stressors too. Like, you have a baby or you start a new job, and there's just stress that comes from naturally
Yeah.
from that. It doesn't have to be bad stress either. It's not like, um, it has to be like a breakup or like trauma. It can be like subtle things that you wouldn't think could be really impactful, but they all add
Yeah.
up. And so yeah, I definitely see stress as being a big factor for a lot of the clients that I work with.
Yeah. And I would agree. I think I've had those cases, well, a couple fold. I've had cases or patients with SIBO and gastroparesis and IBS and like everything in between. And they come to me and we go through their health history with a fine tooth comb, and nothing is adding up. Like they don't have any of the other root cause triggers that I would normally fish for, but their condition was predated by some pretty awful stress. Like one lady comes to mind, her husband lost his job. They were under a great deal of stress as a family for about, I think, a year. And that happened. And like right around that same time, she started getting bloated and like IBS and bowel movements changed and the gastroparesis was diagnosed. And it just all kind of snowballed away from her. And I think you hit the nail on the head, and that was a topic I wanted to get into, is that in the conventional medical community, for better or worse, they approach stress from a very dismissive place of like, you're just a stress case, whatever. Like, get over it. Just, don't be stressed. And A, it's never that simple. But B, like, it's not like you can just consciously choose to not be stressed. If you've ever talked to any human being in their life, like that's not how it happens. Same thing with anxiety. You can't just tell somebody with anxiety, don't be anxious.
Yeah, or
Like
like
that's
chill
not
out.
going to
That's not
work.
gonna, yeah, it's
Yeah.
gonna
Uh,
probably cause the opposite effect.
Yeah, because they're going to feel not heard and like they've been dismissed. And I still remember too, I had this patient with migraines. She was primarily seeing me for migraines. And she had, some gut stuff too, but we were going through her very complicated health history and we were going through, what all led her to the path to come to me. And I brought up stress pretty gently. Like I try to approach it from a non-assholey standpoint, honestly. And it was very surprising and scary for me because she lashed out at me big time and she started like cry yelling at me, like she's crying and screaming at me and like talking really fast and getting really like sympathetic and really like riled up and telling me that of course she's not a lunatic, she would never give herself migraines intentionally and she doesn't want the attention and she doesn't want this and this and of course she's not. And I was like, whoa. And I just had to kind of sit back and absorb it because like I couldn't get a word in edgewise, but I was like, the whole time I was like, this poor human being is if I thought she was stressed before, now I know you're really stressed and you're really teetering on the edge of that sympathetic dominance issue. Like if any little thing like tipped you over that edge, that proves my hypothesis. But B, just like, my gosh, like you've been through some trauma and this is not reflective of like your opinion of me or me necessarily. It's just, you've been through a lot of bullshit to get to this point. And she had migraines for years and years and years and years and she couldn't live her life. And she's tried all the drugs and it's just like, you poor soul, like you've gone through so much. So I really tried to not take it personally, but it was very startling and kind of honestly scary, especially as a people pleaser person where like I hate anybody being angry at me or frustrated with me. I was like, oh, please love me. I wasn't trying to be a jerk, I swear.
Yeah. No, I think you're 100% right. Like a lot of times if I'm analyzing a case, and there's like a few that come to mind where it's like, oh, like, yeah, it could be like something over here. It could be something over here. And then like, we're kind of like piecing it together and they sort of say it as an afterthought. Like, oh yeah, like there was like a huge period of stress right here. And so like, usually it's not like what they're zeroing in on most of the time. It's like an afterthought. So it usually probably takes a practitioner like us who's really keen and looking closely at those comments of like, okay, wait, can you like explain what was going on?
Yeah.
And it'll be like, oh, my dad died, or like, I had a huge move and like I basically uprooted my family, or started a new job that was really stressful mixed with other stressors. So it is wild that there's a lot of blind spots, and I think there's a ton of reasons for that. I think we're very resistant to do stress management. That's at least what I've seen from working with people. And I think even to myself, I can find that there's some periods of time where I'm way more resistant to stress management. And usually that's when I'm stressed. So like, it's such a hard area to tackle because there's a lot of blocks that come into play there. And I think just culturally, there's a lot of blocks. I think for women, it's harder. We've kind of brushed on this in the past too. I find that for women, they don't know how to work it into their day if they're trying to do everything for everyone. And I think men in the other direction, like sometimes bury it deeper and like don't really acknowledge that they're stressed. Like I think women are a little bit better about knowing that they're stressed. Men, I feel like not quite as much from what I've seen. I don't know if that's something that you've seen.
Totally. And I would argue that that's part of why married men live longer than single men.
Yeah.
Like, have you read this statistic? Like, pardon me. It's like 5 years difference between married men and single men.
Oh my gosh.
And I swear, I think it's two reasons. I think that I think it's one main reason, because their spouse, oftentimes women, are going to be the person who's like, you need to go to the doctor. You haven't been to the whatever doctor in a long time. Here, take your vitamin. Here, eat a vegetable. Like my dad straight up would survive on nothing but pizza, cheese doodles, and 7-Up if it was up to him. But because my mom and I and my husband are around, like he occasionally eats broccoli or
Yeah.
Brussels sprouts or something. But like that's not his choosing. So I think that women tend to get our men to do the healthier things. And also, maybe it is like women are a little bit more in tune with stress and anxiety and stuff. And I think that sometimes it's the women in their lives who are like, okay, Roy, enough's enough. You need to go to, a psychologist or a therapist, or
Yeah.
like, we need to go to couples therapy because I can't handle you and your stuff anymore. And yeah, so I have observed that also about men. Although women, I've seen numerous times with myself and with other women that we can be blissfully unaware of how stressed we are. And I think it's a
Right.
protective mechanism because it's like all your body knows is that you need to survive and you need to keep going and keep going and keep going. And if you stop for long enough to observe your stress, there's like this risk that your body's just going to say, whoo, and not keep pushing through,
Yeah,
you know?
it's like a survival mode. You're in survival mode, just
Yeah.
trying to get through the day and get everything done. And if you acknowledge that you're stressed, that could make you more stressed. So
Yeah.
it's a tricky paradigm to get out of
Hmm.
if you're in that space. And that's something I see all the time too. So,
Yeah. And I would say, I think a lot of stress, at least as I observe it in the modern world, a lot of stress is due to feeling like we don't have time because we have to work, you know, we have to work and have our family life and maybe have a social life and maybe do something for our health. And it's like, and we have to cook and we have to clean and we have to do whatever. And it's like, I know that's my biggest hurdle is the reason why I'm not as diligent about exercise or meditation or doing the things that actually would benefit my stress level and my health is because I convince myself that I don't have the time.
yeah.
And it's really tough because it's like, how do you tell a person who self assesses that they don't have the time? How do you tell them, well, but maybe you could make a little bit of time and just like meet me part way? It can be really tricky. Um,
Right. And I think like usually, and I'm sure you do too, gauge where the person's at. Like
yeah,
if someone's stressed to the max, I don't know if it's optimal to try to incorporate like a large volume of stress management at one time. It's like
yeah.
how do you take baby steps towards the right direction? Um and one other thing, and we'll kind of dive into this too, with stress, there's so much interaction between like the brain gut axis, the hormone, like there's so much
Yes.
internal stress that's happening with gut issues anyway.
Hmm.
And I think that's something I see too, where some of the people I'm working with will tell me, you know what, I'm not really stressed at all. Like, I don't think I need stress management. And I'm sure there's some stressors that they're just unaware of, but like even the
Hmm.
fact that you have like a chronic issue internally that's stressing your body out,
Yeah.
there's like physical stress that's happening. Um, and I think the physical stress is a really key thing to clue in on because like that encompasses like movement, sunlight,
Hmm.
circadian rhythm, sleep. It's not just about like meditation and like what we typically think of as stress management to
Bubble
sort of,
baths.
yeah, exactly, to keep the systems aligned. It has to do a lot with a lot of different things. And I think usually if you can do small tweaks in a lot of different areas, you're going to get a bigger effect than like just focusing on doing bubble baths or like doing 30 minutes of meditation. Like you could do the same allotment of time, kind
Hmm.
of spaced out in different areas, and you could have a bigger effect.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also like, um, just kind of evaluating your individual stressors too. Like, I've definitely had scenarios, and sometimes even in my personal life, where I'm like, all right, does it make more sense to spend money on a gym membership or a meditation app or a meditation doodad? Or does it make more sense, like, if your main stressor is poor communication with your spouse, maybe you're better off spending a couple $100 on some counseling sessions, and that would net you a better result instead of buying the bath bombs and I don't know, and like going to the spa or, you know, the cliches. Like maybe you could spend that amount of money on something that's unique to your stress. So sometimes that is lost in the conversation too. Like you could do the generic stress reduction stuff, which is great, but also like identify your biggest sources of stress and then try to tackle those to the best of your ability.
Right. Like, what's the cost benefit ratio to your stress management approaches?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really interesting point. And to kind of jump off from there, I know working with clients, sometimes there's like almost too much focus on like nailing every piece of the stress management that they don't have like any fun or pleasure. Like, I almost think that that's like a big
Take
piece
it
of
too
it.
far. Yeah.
Yeah, a big piece of it too. Like, they're like, you know, they might be meditating 15 to 30 minutes a day. They're sleeping. They're like checking every box, but then like I'm talking to them and they still seem stressed. And like, you know, then I might ask them like, or do you hang out with your friends often? Like, are you engaging in activities and hobbies that you like? Is there anything that you want to do more of that you aren't doing now currently? I
Yeah.
think those are all key questions too, of like, maybe it's just a lack of doing things that you enjoy.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that you have to go and like do something really intense that's like dive into some whole new thing. It's more like, how can you find pleasure on a weekly
Yeah.
basis with things that you
Fun and
enjoy?
human connection.
Yeah, for sure.
And actually, that's a really funny point, and I had never thought of it this way, but I'm going to totally rat out my best friend right now. So when you were talking about this, it made me think of, so Mamie is the raddest human being ever. Hi, Mamie. So Mamie and I went to an IFM conference a few years ago. We rendezvoused in San Diego. We shared an Airbnb. It was so fun, mostly because of her, less because of the IFM. And when we met up, I remember one of the things that she would do is she would wake up early in the morning before me and she would meditate like a weirdo in the closet of the Airbnb.
Oh,
She would
wait, why
sit in
did it
the,
have to be the closet?
I don't know, she wanted privacy. She's also very tiny, so I get like she fits. But yeah, she would literally like wake up, go lock herself in the closet for like an hour, I think, and meditate first thing in the morning, which is great. I would keep sleeping. And then in the evening, at some point, she would like lock herself in the closet and meditate for like another hour in the evening. And in retrospect, freaking maybe you should have just hung out with your BFF for that extra hour and foregone the extra hour of meditation, you weirdo. Because here, like we barely get to see each other because she lives on the other coast. I was going to say the wrong coast because I tease her, but she lives in San Francisco. I live in North Carolina. We never get to see each other. It would have been possibly more therapeutic to just lay on the bed and like shoot the shit and just
Yeah.
chat and like connect with your best friend again for the 5 days we were at the conference. But it is kind of funny because it's like that same allotment of time might have actually been more effectively used just goofing off and shooting the breeze and like not doing something that typically we would think of as a stress reduction thing. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
And I'm thinking of one client in particular who, um, he's like the head of a health and wellness company. Like, so very like, very into health and wellness. We were having a conversation and he was basically saying, you know, like meditation seems to stress me out. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? And we're kind of like talking it through. He's like, I've been doing it every day. Like, but he's like, it just feels like a chore. Like, so we're exploring like, okay, like what else are you like seeking that you're not getting now? And we kind of boil it down to like, he is like big on adventure. And with
Mm,
COVID stuff, like he hasn't been able to like do as much travel with his friends. And so then we're kind of like, okay, we're on to something here. Like, how can we work this in a way that's like
yeah.
comfortable for you and safe to do, considering the current time? So we're like, oh, he loves to like go off-roading on his bike, but just like hasn't been doing it as much. So then we can start to kind of wean into what you're saying, a very specific approach that'll work for the individual. Meditation isn't going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
And stress management's a very individual thing, and
Yeah.
it sometimes takes a level of experimentation and really understanding how and why you're stressed to figure out what's going to work for you.
Yep. Yeah, and it makes me think too. I had a patient. We did our most recent appointment probably 2 weeks ago, and it was really interesting. We ended up talking predominantly about the stress response of the gut-brain axis and how that relates to his symptoms. And he's an attorney, and he was like describing his work. He's like, I own a business. I'm always behind. I've always got like 8,000 projects, and I've got to do like the free, like the little freebie calls to talk to prospective clients. And I'm always behind on some big project. And like, I just hired somebody to take some tasks off my plate, like an assistant, but I have to train them. And then that's stressful. And we ended up talking quite a lot about his business and his business model and his work life. And it was funny because I almost felt like a little bit of a business coach in a way, because we were talking about like, oh, here's where you could put like a filter in place and make a little bit less work for you, or here's that way you could pre-qualify somebody before working with you, or here are things that you could do to like manage your clients a little bit better. And I was joking with him because after like 45 minutes or an hour of talking about this, I just kind of kicked back. I was like, this is the most holistic appointment ever, because we haven't talked about your gut at all. We're talking about the real issue, which is your poor body is so like tense and stressed all day. And then for him, all of his symptoms kick in as soon as he lays down to relax or go to bed at night. And I was like, it's probably your poor body that's like hanging on by a thread all day and has like this tension. And then you lay down and your body is like, oh, and you like collapse and you fall apart. And there you get this manifestation of symptoms. But it ended up, I thought it was a very productive conversation, and I think he did as well. Where it's like, I could tell you to take a probiotic, or I could tell you to eat fermented food or whatever it might be. But I think the big biggie driving your gut symptoms is your stress and your work life, and just, putting some things in place and trying to work toward it. Like, I've got 8,000 sticky notes on a board right here next to me. Like, I'm not perfect, but my work definitely causes me stress, but it's like, keep chipping away at it, because like I told you, as an unbiased third party, like this is what's going on with your gut. And you could do, I had him start doing like a marshmallow cold infusion, and that really helped his symptoms and his reflux. So he's like, keep doing the marshmallow, but also work on the actual root causes. Because if you just keep pushing through with your lawyerly business the way it is, I think your gut's going to be pretty PO'd indefinitely.
Yeah, no, and I think it can be very easy to, like in the functional space that we sort of operate in, to get caught up in like the supplements or the labs or those sorts of things. But sometimes it's like the most practical thing that like isn't really on the radar, like of the health world most of the time. Yeah. Sometimes those are the things that help the most, which is always surprising sometimes. Interesting. One of my favorite like functional integrative medicine stories, that it's actually in Chris Kresser's book. I think it's in his book, or maybe it was in his podcast, but I'll never forget it because it was like during my health journey, and it like was a light bulb moment for me. But he was saying, and this was like 5 or 6 years ago, so when like I feel like when a lot of the restrictive diets started to get more intense. Yeah. But he was working with like a younger guy, maybe 20 years old, 25, like somewhere in there. And this kid kept getting worse and worse, and they kept like kind of like manipulating the diet, but it wasn't working. And so one day the kid came in for an appointment, and Chris was like, what do you want? Like, is there something that like you feel like's off? And the kid was like, I just want to have like pizza and beer with my friends. Like, that's all I want to do. And Chris Kresser's like, well, maybe we should just like do that like maybe once a week. Like, you can have that like as something you do. And Chris either wrote in his book or on a podcast, again, I'm not sure, said that like literally the kid got better because he needed connection. Like, even if he was kind of eating beer and pizza, which certainly is not necessarily
Not
the
healthy. That's
optimal
right.
for the gut, but the benefit of the connection was greater than the con of eating outside
Yeah.
the realm of the diet. And for that particular case, he needed connection in a huge way, and he wasn't able to do that when he was on the restrictive diet.
Yeah.
So it's just like a really, and I think the diets in general cause more stress into an already stressed out system. But I always like that story because it definitely emphasizes that like you do need to be aware of like what your body's telling you, and some of these things that we cut out to pursue health, you do need to be healthy. It's weird. It's like a weird, I don't know.
There's a
It's a
sweet
weird
spot.
dilemma.
Yeah, there's a sweet spot where it's like you want to obviously not eat like bear claws and pizza for
Yeah.
100% of your diet, but also like it orthorexia, right? It's that like
Yeah.
unhealthy obsession with healthy eating. And I think that the same thing could be said of just like health promoting things. So the people
Yeah.
who are overly stressed with, I have to exercise X amount every day for, my health, and I have to do X amount of meditation a day, and I have to take X amount of supplementation a day, and I have to, do whatever. And it's like, okay, but like having all of that on your plate can actually be intrinsically stressful at times. So just like give yourself a week off where like you stay in your pajamas for the week, or
Yeah.
and like you don't meditate or work out ever. Like
For
live la vida
sure.
loca. But yeah, I think that you can go too far. It's the too much of a good thing. You can have that with health promoting things like nutrition and other health promoting things where like the yeah, and you could think of it as like crowding out. It's similar to dysbiosis where like you want to have enough good things in your life that you crowd out the opportunity for anything bad to come into your life
Yeah.
in a weird way. But also if you fill up your life with, and again, I'll pick on Mamie in this case, like with that trip, if she filled up her days and her moments with the 2 hours of meditation every day, it did take away from the opportunity to just hang out with me. And let's face it, I'm pretty cool, so who wouldn't want to do that? But
Yeah.
like, it's every moment you have a choice to do something, and sometimes the things that we think are health promoting might actually not be as much as we would think. Like maybe just being a bum and watching Netflix with your friends and eating a slice of pizza is actually going to net you more positive benefit.
Right. And I think something to clue on what you're saying about like the net benefit, the way I sort of view it, and I talk about this with my clients, like the reason you do these things, like health promoting things, is so that you can live your life the way you want to live your life. Like
Yeah.
you have passions, you have goals, like you have things you want to do. If the health promoting stuff is preventing you from being able to be productive in the things that you want to do, and the passions that you enjoy or the people that you enjoy, like that's not good. So
It's almost like swapping one out for the other.
exactly, it's such a and the sweet spot idea is such a good way to think about it. You just want to be cautious about where you're drawing that line. And I think just asking yourself too, are these things serving me? Am I being productive? Am I accomplishing some of the goals that I'm laying out for myself, and
Mm-hmm.
still doing the passions that I enjoy? Because I do see a lot of times like so much of the health promoting stuff doesn't allow for productivity outside of the health space. Like there's so much focus on the health activities and strategies that you don't live your life at all. And
Yeah.
so again, it is that fine line approach, that sweet spot approach that
Yeah.
I think is really key. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, I think, be a healthy person, but don't cut your nose off to spite your face is almost another
Yes.
way to think of it. Like, and it makes
Mhm.
me think again, I'll pick on some colleagues. I went to an environmental medicine conference and it was so fun. And it was out of town. Like I, did an Airbnb with a friend. And I remember there was a group of a handful of individuals. And this is the type of conference where we're talking all day, every day about glyphosate and
Yeah.
phthalates and BPA and like all of the chemical scary shit out there. So every year when I go, it does add this layer of like paranoia. I'm like, oh God, I have to worry about that now. Um, but then I remember like when I hang out with the group of like naturopaths who are super into environmental medicine and like the toxins and the detoxing and stuff, they're kind of impossible to hang out with sometimes because so many of them will only go to like two restaurants ever because the restaurant has to be 100% dedicated organic, 100% farm to table. They ask like the wait staff, does anything here get sprayed with Roundup? Like, and it's kind of, it's like,
Yeah.
it's great to try to avoid that chemical shit as much as you can. However, if you are to a point where there's only like one restaurant in your town that you'll dine at, if it's something like that, like you do have some potential control over, like maybe live La Vida Loca and eat at like the gluten-free restaurant that's not 100% organic.
Yeah.
You know, like that would be wild for some of these folks.
Yeah.
Um,
Living life on the edge.
Yeah, and I know like some people, you know, do exist that get noticeable symptoms immediately from glyphosate, for example, so they have to be more cautious. And like obviously if you are a celiac like me or if you're gluten sensitive, you can't just like go and eat at like Domino's or Olive Garden.
For
Like
sure.
there is that like keep it reasonable, but also again, I'm telling you these this particular group of like nutritionists and naturopaths, they're just impossible to socialize with because they refuse to go anywhere other than like one or two restaurants in the greater Phoenix metro area, which is, by
Oh,
the way, a very large city. Like,
yeah.
if you have two restaurants in the greater area of Phoenix that you're willing to go to, you'd be doomed if you moved to a place like Chapel Hill because it's a small town. Um,
Yeah. I'm thinking
but
of
anyway,
Cincinnati, Ohio, which I don't know, it's like a decent sized city where I'm at. And I'm trying to think of like a 100% organic, besides like maybe
it's
something that's
hard.
like a smoothie, like we have a couple smoothie
Yeah.
like juiceries that are more 100% organic. But yeah, it's super challenging. And like for me, because I get so much benefit out of connection, and I think it sounds like you do too,
Yeah.
like if I get invited to a restaurant by a friend that, you know, isn't 100% organic, like I can do my best and find things that I know I can tolerate pretty well
Yeah.
on the menu and like be just fine, and the benefit outweighs the con of like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, there might be pesticides on the foods and that
Yeah.
sort of thing, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and similar, like I'm really grateful to live in this day and age because I can't imagine being a celiac 20 years ago or 30 years ago or more, for example. So like there are definitely, you know, I think practically every restaurant I can find something that I could eat. Well, like, maybe not every restaurant, but um, many restaurants I can be at least, you know, even if it's like I get a salad and a plain steak, like I could do something typically. If I have my say in it, I'm going to pick one of my favorite restaurants that I know is really caters to gluten-free stuff. But yeah, if I get invited to something, I'm going to try to go, and I might call the restaurant ahead of time and ask about their options and do my homework. But I'm generally going to try to go when I can. But I think back, like my first celiac friend, I remember in undergrad in 2004, one of my best friends was celiac, and I don't know how the girl survived because she was running marathons. She was a rower on my rowing team. And literally, the only thing I ever remember the girl really eating was artichokes and cucumbers. And I'm sure there was other stuff too, but like there was no gluten-free pasta. There was no gluten-free bread. There was no nothing. And it was just like, I remember her eating those two items. And I don't know how she survived as long as she did eating that way. Just,
Yeah, that blows my mind too. I had like a friend similarly who I ran cross country with growing up and in high school who would eat like coleslaw in a little bag and Diet Coke. Like that's all she would eat. And I'm like,
uh,
you are literally running like she would run before school and after school for cross country
oh
practice. And I'm just
gosh.
like thinking back, like we knew something was off. Like we'd kind of um, you know, give her grief for how much Diet Coke she drank. Like, be like, oh, Kelly, she's got like two huge Diet Cokes from McDonald's. You know,
Oh,
like on our way home, we'd stop places and Like it blew my mind how much Diet Coke she drank. But looking back, it is crazy. Like I don't know how some of these really intense athletes are getting by with like
Nothing.
artichokes and cucumbers.
Yeah.
Sounds like the worst combination
Yeah.
from my
Uh,
from my standpoint.
it was a lot. So I'm
Yeah.
definitely grateful that I have more options now than Jill
Yeah.
did back then. And thankfully, she's doing better now and she lives in a place. Buffalo, New York has never been like a cornucopia of healthy eateries.
Yeah.
They're big on chicken wings and pizza. And those are like the staples. So
Yeah.
she didn't have a lot of options back in the day. Um, and she moved to Oregon and that opened up some possibilities for her. And now with gluten-free being so much more popular and common, now I think she's doing okay with that. But yeah, at the time I remember she sustained herself on like a very minimal amount of items.
Oh
Um,
no, poor Jill.
I know. Oh, Jill. She,
Well,
for the record, is the friend who told me, and I quote, "It's a natural kind of dirty," and convinced me to drink the creek water. For those of you who have not listened to episode 1 yet, I encourage you to go listen to that story.
oh my gosh. Well,
Freaking Jill.
the creek water like might was that what we think might have spurred the celiac in you, or like maybe
I
she
really
wanted
wonder,
a
yes.
friend. Maybe she wanted a celiac
Right?
friend or something.
That jerk. Yeah,
Just
she
to,
was definitely a celiac before the parasites. Maybe she was trying to treat her own celiac disease, right? Because like there are some cases of like autoimmunity and inflammatory conditions being treated with like porcine hookworms or something. Like
yeah,
maybe she was trying to treat
she
the
was gonna
celiac disease.
take her chances with. She was sick of the artichokes and the cucumbers. She was gonna take her chances with the
And
creek
then she was going
water.
to take me down with her.
Yeah, she
No, I
didn't
wish it
care
was
who
that
she
thought
brought
out.
down.
No, no, we were just thirsty and we were dumb.
Oh no. Um, well, I think too, like what we probably want to touch on is just like the physiology of the stress response
Yeah.
and what that looks like. I know one of the interesting things that I'll always point out to the clients that I work with, there was a smaller study. I wish there was more, just because I think it's fascinating that links IBS with low vagal tone, and that
Hmm.
makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
from our standpoint. But oftentimes, if your vagus nerve is not optimal, you're going to have a really hard time getting out of a fight or flight state. You're going to be sort of slated to be in that more
Yeah.
sympathetic dominant state. And so a lot of times too, if you are someone that is like anxious and stressed out, you could have this low vagal tone issue that's really preventing you from going into a rest and digest state, which is going to be optimal for digestion, motility, and pretty much everything digestively. So I think that that's something really important to recognize. And I know that you talk about this too, but even just the which I've heard from my clients, it's like I feel stuck in fight or flight.
Yeah.
I've definitely heard that a lot. I'm sure you've heard it. And I almost think like there's a lot of physiological effects that make it harder to get out of fight or flight when you have some of these like nervous system issues that are slating you more towards a fight or flight state.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm going to pull something up too. I wonder if I could screen share for a moment. Yeah, I think I will be able to. I would add to that too that I think that the tone, like sympathetic versus parasympathetic tone, is important. And you can think of it too, like if your rest and digest side of your nervous system, if your vagus nerve is not working appropriately, or if you haven't used it in 20 years because you've been a damn stress case,
Yeah.
if you have been chronically stressed for a lot of years, you can't go and exercise that muscle, so to speak, right away. Like you can't go from never going to the gym to doing 100 push-ups overnight. You're going to fry your nerve. So
Right.
instead, sometimes it needs to be gradual, where like you start with baby steps and then more baby steps and you build on it, because nerves have a tone to them and they have a health and a plasticity. And if you try to get that nervous pathway to do too much all at once, it's going to be like shell shocked. So I think this is where like gradual baby steps in the right direction is important. And just knowing that Rome wasn't built in a day and you're not going to get there like immediately is
Right.
important. And yeah, and like if you perceive that you're stuck in that fight or flight mode, then just taking it down a couple of pegs gradually can be really, really beneficial. Um, and that is something that I find really fascinating. And this is something that I'm researching a lot these days is that coincidentally, like in the integrated medicine space, we tend to talk about like the sympathetic parasympathetic thing as like one entity. And then like adrenal fatigue or the stress response and the HPA
Yeah.
axis is kind of this other entity. But now, in my opinion, we're talking about basically the same thing, and there's just multiple threads to the web. So even something like, stress chemistry, and this is what I'll share my screen with you for just a quick moment for. I don't want to bore the audio only people, but basically what you're looking at is there's this graph that I like to show patients where, it's a pyramid shape and cholesterol is way up at the tip top. And then your body takes cholesterol and it turns it into all of the sex hormones. So progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, all of those are made out of cholesterol. Or you have an alternative pathway. If you go to the left in this image instead of the right, you can turn that cholesterol, that precursor, into cortisol and cortisone. And I've seen this numerous times where like people's stress response is getting away from them and, their estrogen is all wacky and also, their cholesterol is really high a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Or bottomed out completely and they have like no cholesterol in their blood sample. And I think it's that the body is trying to shuttle precursors towards the stress chemistry because it's just like you need that chemistry to keep you going. You need that cortisol to like keep you alive and keep you trudging through life. And it can throw off everything else. It can throw off your hormones because now you're sucking up the precursors and you're turning them into stress chemistry instead of testosterone and estrogen and progesterone. And it can mess with your cholesterol synthesis in the liver because I think your liver just starts saying, oh my God, like we need more of this stuff. We'd better make more cholesterol.
Yeah.
And it can throw off so much of your physiology. The moment you start messing with hormones, everything kind of goes out the window because hormones interact with literally every cell of your entire body. And the same thing goes for the gut because you need to absorb nutrients and yada, yada. But like, that's just one example of like the chronic stress response of the fight or flight. And it can really just put this cascade into play where it kind of snowballs away from you. And ultimately, the best thing you could do is to work on mitigating that stress chemistry and that stress response and help your body handle that more efficiently. Connected to everything else though.
Yeah, and I like what you were saying too, and I believe the same exact thing that like there's so much interplay between the nervous system and hormones, and so I kind of view it as a stress response. Like like fight or flight tends to be like connected to the nervous system, but there's so many like, again, as I sort of view it as a stress response because it's more than just the nervous system being activated in one way. It's like this cascade of hormonal effects that happens after it. And I think that like it's interesting what you mentioned about the cholesterol stuff too, because I almost think like cortisol is such a master hormone where, again, if your body feels like it needs more cortisol and it's like going down a different pathway and pumping that out, then cortisol is going to interact with a lot of other hormones. And one hormone it interacts with a lot is thyroid hormone. Again, if cortisol is being chronically activated and that system is being activated, a lot of times thyroid hormones get suppressed and they also pull cholesterol out of the blood into cells. So I think that that's a connection too. If the stress response is like out of control, thyroid hormones are usually trying to like slow down metabolic function a lot of times, preserve fuel or things like that. And there can be a big thyroid effect when cortisol gets out of whack. And so I definitely see that with cholesterol too, a connection between lower thyroid hormones, like active hormones, not like the messenger TSH, but like free T3,
Yeah.
and higher cholesterol as well.
Yeah. And I think, like, going to the cortisol piece of the conversation, the so-called stress hormone, but acknowledging it has a lot of other roles in the body.
For
There
sure.
is, hormones interact with every cell of the body. And therefore, again, like, all hats are off when you start talking about a hormone like cortisol. But one of the things is that cortisol and corticotropin releasing hormone, the thing that kind of predates or precedes cortisol release, those two hormones will directly cause leaky gut, and they will directly upregulate and degranulate mast cells in the intestines, which are a type of immune cell in the intestines that tend to be either more numerous or more active in people with irritable bowel syndrome. And it can lead to a lot of the symptoms and the pathology that we see with irritable bowel syndrome. So again, it's like, if you're chronically in that fight or flight, yes, your vagus nerve is going to be toast, and therefore your motility is going to be toast, and you're not going to make stomach acid, and like your digestive juices are all going to suck. But also, you're going to be giving yourself leaky gut, and you're going to be giving yourself some pretty ticked off and degranulated mast cells, and then that can perpetuate things like visceral hypersensitivity and irritable bowel syndrome more broadly. And it'll keep you stuck in a freaking rut if you don't address it. And you're going to keep learning the same lessons until you take note and you respond to them. I think that's something I'm learning in my adulthood too, is like, if something, your body sends you a minor annoying signal, and then a moderate annoying signal, and then a big annoying signal, and then it's just going to start doing weird shit and just whacking away and stuff. And it's like,
Yeah.
it keeps escalating the response until you pay attention and you do something.
Yeah.
And it's your body kind of saying, like, you knucklehead, pay attention to me. Come on. I'm stressed. Cut it out. But again, it's the American way, and it's the way of the modern world. Is just like, take all your stress, ball it up into a little ball, and shove it down, and never open it back up ever. And it's hurting a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I think that like I sort of view like from an evolutionary standpoint stress as being like, if you are stressed and your body thinks that you're chronically being attacked by a bear, it has no use for digestion. So it's going to shut that system down in a lot of different ways. And you're just going to have major problems. And like what you're saying, it's going to keep you stuck. And I also like that you were saying like it's going to constantly send you signals until you pay attention. Unfortunately, we often don't pay attention to the earlier signals until it becomes a major issue.
I'm not immune to that. I don't know about you, but like,
Exactly.
I've had that in my personal life too.
Yeah, exactly. So unfortunately, it often gets to like a point where it's way more life disrupting than it might have been at the initial stage.
Yeah.
But yeah, to me, like simply put, stress is just going to totally halt digestion in so many different ways, leave you more susceptible for permeability. Also, even just like virulence of some pathogens increase when you have more stress, which is basically saying that like pathogens can become more disease promoting. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of times people, have things like these pathogens on stool tests that we see. And it's like, if you're stressed out, like it's going to be really hard to get rid of pathogens as well, which I don't know, is a huge problem.
And it's interesting if you think about it, because remember, like back in the day, we used to think that, reflux is caused by stress, like stress and acidic foods. And now it turns out, well, acidic foods almost always are high histamine foods, A. And B, like the stress, maybe it's playing a direct role, but maybe it's also playing an indirect role, and it's making H. pylori more virulent in the stomach.
Yeah.
Or candida more virulent in the stomach, or whatever it might be. And now you're off to the races, and you've got this like sucky reflux problem, and the doctors tell you, hey, you're just stressed. But it's connecting those dots and realizing, no, this really is relevant for me. Now what do I do about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's taking down your immune defenses. Like if your gut's permeable and it's leaky and your immune system is shot because of stress, and in the stress that's going on in the gut and the inflammation that's going on in the gut, it would make sense that there'd be a higher like virulence of these pathogens.
Yeah.
And again, it's just so crucial to like find ways to work on some of the stress management stuff so that you can overcome some of the gut stuff. And I mean, like we were talking about before, it's just there's a lot of missed opportunities from what I've seen to hone in on this. And it's, I think a lot of times because there's so much focus on the diet piece, which also adds stress to the equation.
Yeah.
There's so much focus on a lot of these strategies that don't affect stress in any way, or maybe add to stress. Like if you're just managing tons of supplements and tons of dietary restrictions, that's just going to add more stress to the mix. And so it's just such a challenge, I think, because even in the functional space, I feel like there's not as much focus on the stress management piece as I would like. Again, kind of how clients will bring it up to me as an afterthought. I feel like same thing goes for practitioners. Like they might mention it like, oh, like you should be doing something, but like then it's just kind of a casual comment. It's not like really honing in on strategies for that particular person and making it a bigger pillar of the strategies that you're utilizing. I don't know if you've seen that too.
I have, and I've fallen susceptible to that a little bit in my clinical practice, but I'm much better about it now.
Yeah.
I think there's a few reasons. Like I could speak for the functional medicine / integrative naturopathic profession, not necessarily conventional medicine. I think that they just are like, all of them are burned out and overworked and underpaid and just like, they just hate their life. But with the integrative space, you would think like most of these people like myself are business owners and we structure our day in a way that we see fit, and we charge higher rates and we don't bill insurance. So there's a lot of things that you would think like, oh, that person like can be more open-minded and think outside the box and do things in a particular way. But I've noticed, I think that stress is overlooked or downplayed in the functional space, because we get a lot of shiny thing syndrome where we go to conferences and we go to seminars, and very frequently seminars are sponsored by or put on by a supplement company. Or if it's a big conference, they will have booths with vendors from companies that sell supplements or lab testing. And on the breaks, you are encouraged to go mingle and talk to the people at the booths. And it's okay because them doing booths, that's subsidizing the fee that I'm paying for attending the conference. So like it's a win-win. But also I think I always go into those situations with like a little dose of skepticism, because I know that every single one of those people at those booths want to sell me shit. And they want me to open up an account and put big orders in for all of their fancy schmancy supplements and pills. And that's their goal. And I have to be the one to like make that decision if I want to do that or if I think it's going to be helpful for my patients. But all of those people at the booths are salespeople. Yeah. So I think that a lot of practitioners are maybe not as aware of that, or they're not as like skeptical of that. And so they go to a conference and then they learn about a new supplement and they're like, gosh, golly gee, I'm going to get all my patients on that supplement. Or it's just really emphasized in protocols and in group forums, like on professional forums. It's always like, give me your best SIBO protocol. And then people are just rattling off supplements. So I think A is that the profession does tend to be very, very supplement heavy. And B, I think, and I get this a little bit, I don't know if this is like me having a weird complex, but I feel like I need to live up to the doctor title to some extent. And it almost feels like if I'm going to get kickback, like that patient who lashed out at me, if I'm going to get grief for doing like more of the life coachy stuff, there's an element of me that's like, oh, but what if people are like frustrated and they think, gosh, if I wanted life coaching, I would have paid a lower fee and I would have gotten a life coach instead of going to see you and like, you need to doctorify me and talk about test results and magic pills. And I wonder if my colleagues feel somewhat similarly in that regard. Like they think they need to do just the doctory stuff and leave like the health coaching to the health coaches. But you can't separate the two because it's people's lives that are making their bodies freak out. And you can't just like give people a magic essential oil for vagus nerve tone and think that that's going to cover up the fact that they are miserable in their marriage, or they get 0 sleep per night, or they hate their job, or they have a long commute, or like they never see their friends, or, pick your poison.
Yeah, I could definitely see the what you were describing, because I think that it's so basic, like stress management seems so basic.
Yeah.
Um, but a lot of times it sounds like, working with my clients, it's like everyone's having so much trouble implementing it. So there almost is a skill around, like, how do you
Yeah.
coach? Like, what's the coaching mechanism of figuring out what works and what doesn't?
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying. It's like you want to make sure that they're getting out what is expected, you know?
Yeah.
So I 100% could see that.
Yeah, it's tough. I don't know if I'm the only one who feels that way, but I've definitely had those moments where, yeah, I'm conscious of that, and I feel like I need to bust out all the bells and whistles and fancy stuff,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's not often what gets people better. I've spent a lot of money on a very expensive inventory of supplements and magic pills, and sometimes they are magical and oftentimes they're not, and you've just got to balance like a little bit of supplementation, a bit of diet work, and some of the lifestyle stuff. And like it's tough. It's way easier to take a pill. I think that's the other thing, is the issue of compliance. I think
Yeah,
that,
for sure.
from
For sure.
my profession, I think it's like, well, I could recommend X, Y, and Z, but are they going to be compliant with it and follow through with it? Or I can recommend that they take, X herbal magic elixir, and then they'll feel like I'm doing something for them and I'm not giving them like a chore to do. So I think that's a piece of it too. It's just like gauging people's willingness to do stuff.
Right. No, I think that makes total sense. From like do you typically use any like adaptogens that you like? I know
So much
you're the
love.
herb lady.
Yeah, and that I pretty much keep this bad boy on my desk at all times.
Oh,
It's like
nice.
a giant book of adaptogens because even I need to refer to it sometimes. Yeah, totes my goats. My One of my experiences that really made me open up my eyes, and I'll kind of paint this picture for you, is that for a while, I was in this phase of my clinical career where I was like, I'm not going to worry about the adrenal so much because there's compelling data. And there was a meta-analysis a couple years back, I think it was like 2016, that point blank said adrenal fatigue is not a thing. Like adrenal fatigues, it does not exist. The glands don't fatigue, that's not a real thing. And we know that some degree of HPA axis dysfunction is a thing,
Yeah.
but like the idea that the glands shrivel up and it goes through like stage
Yeah.
one, stage two, stage whatever, like
Right.
that is not super well established in actual literature.
Yeah.
But that doesn't matter. So I kind of followed that and I thought, when I was really stressed and really fatigued, my adrenals looked perfect on paper.
Yeah.
And that frustrated the heck out of me. And I thought, well, God, like if I don't have adrenal fatigue, who does? I'm not going to do this kind of test. And B, reading things like that meta-analysis made me really question, like, it's like hippy-dippy bullshit. I'm not going to do it. But what I've realized now, like I said earlier, is that the gut-brain axis and the so-called adrenal piece of the picture that we usually talk about are one and the same thing. And they're
Yeah.
just all melded together in a mishmash. And what I've found is that most of the herbs that we think of for the adrenals, so, the adaptogens and the nervines, things like ashwagandha and passion flower, like they probably work less on the adrenal glands themselves, but they work on the nervous system and that fight or flight response and that sympathetic parasympathetic balance and that unconscious part of your nervous system that you don't have conscious control over. It's modulating and balancing that. So I use a lot of nervine and adaptogen herbs for that purpose, where I'm trying to regulate the stress response more broadly. I'm not thinking about it in terms of like the adrenal glands being fatigued or hypertrophied. And
Right.
I never do adrenal testing, like the salivary index. I never do it. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to ask somebody, hey, rate your stress 0 to 10, and they say 7. And then it's not super like amazing on my part to go, all right, let's do some adaptogens and some nervines and see how you do.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to waste, $125 doing an adrenal salivary index test to tell you that you would benefit from a damn adaptogen. Like,
right.
just save your money.
Yeah. And I think, again, like, I use adaptogens too. And I think, like, what I usually tell people too, like, sometimes I feel like people think like they're going to take these adaptogens and like their stress is going to go away, which
Oh, sweetie, no.
which I think, like, for me, yeah, like, when you talk to them, it is like an, oh honey, like, let's not get carried away. But I'll usually tell them it sort of takes the edge off. That's usually how I like to describe it. I don't know if you kind of have a similar mentality behind it, but it takes the edge off. It's not going to be a miracle cure or a miracle. There really is, I feel like, no miracle cures, but it's going to...
I can tell you the miracle cure. There is one. Do you want to hear it?
Yeah.
Okay. Right now, everybody listening, and you, Amy.
Okay.
Today, you are quitting your job.
Okay.
You and your husband are moving to the beach. Yay! You're going to find a cave or a house, whichever floats your boat.
Yeah.
And you're going to live in said cave or house, and you're going to have somebody else clean that cave or house for you. You're going to go and just lay on the beach naked and have sex all day. And you're going to eat wild caught fish and organic produce that somebody else cooks and harvests for you. That's it. That's the magic cure.
Sounds good. I'll get right on that.
Shy of that magic beach and that ideal human experience, there is no magic cure. But sometimes I joke about that beach with patients where I'm like, hey, man, if I could tell you to quit your job, ditch your mother-in-law, whoever.
It sounds like you've been dreaming about this miracle cure for a while, Nikki.
I thought it through. You could like wrap some of the food in kelp to get some iodine. I don't know. Like, go for it, man. Oh, and you would have to have a Netflix account.
Yeah, you have some details. You got a lot of the details worked out.
Yeah, I mean, there's like given things that you need to have. But yeah, shy of that, there's no magic cure. The two things that I always tell patients when I send them home with adaptogens and nervines is twofold. Is it A, I'll make them up a compounded tincture typically, or a compounded tea that I make to them and their specifications.
Yeah.
So I'll go back and I joke, I play mad scientist, and I've got like my big cabinet full of herbal tinctures, and I'll like mix and match them and measure them out. And even though I'm mixing it for the individual, I still tell them this is probably not something where like you take it on a Tuesday and then Wednesday you're like, oh. Adaptogens and nervines typically take weeks and months to really build in your system and start unraveling that stress response, and give it a couple of weeks or a month before you really make a judgment call. And then most often people will notice a difference. But if you take it, and I'm impatient like this too, if you take it on a Tuesday and you think like by Thursday you're not feeling anything and you're like, darn it, ashwagandha doesn't work. Like, you need to chill. And I 100,000% blame conventional medicine for this, because we have been conditioned for 100 years now that you take a pill and you immediately feel better. You take an Excedrin, you take a Tylenol, you take, a nasal decongestion, whatever, and then boom, you're good, and you go about muscling through your life. So herbs and natural products are, I would think, honestly, more powerful than medicines a lot of the time, but they just take a little bit of time and patience. So I do tell everybody, don't expect a magic cure overnight. It'll take a couple of weeks or maybe a month or two. But I tell that, and I have had people who like 3 days later or a week later, they're texting me or they're messaging me in the portal, and they're like, this stuff is great. Could you send me a refill now so I never run out?
Yeah.
So those do exist. It's just not always the case. So I prep people for the worst. The other thing is like, and I'm going to hopefully not hit my microphone doing this, you could think of the stress response as this shitty roller coaster ride of like, like really high and really low, where it's like, oh my God, I'm really stressed, crash and burn. Oh my God, I'm really stressed, crash and burn. Oh my God. And you keep doing this for your entire life. And adaptogens and nervines and herbal medicines more broadly can take this crappy up and down yo-yo roller coaster ride, and it can smooth it out. So you're still going to have days that you perceive as more stressful and less stressful, but you're not going to be like here versus here, right? Like you're going to take that edge off, like you said, and the roller coaster becomes more of like a kiddie roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
Like the little kiddie one that you see at the carnival, as opposed to something you would see at Six Flags.
Yeah, like no vomit potential
Yeah, like
on this
just a
ride.
gentle, like,
Yeah.
woo. That's
Yeah.
what we're going for, is like the really dorky kitty roller coaster, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think when you start to get into the really powerful when you get to the really powerful effects is when you start blending things like adaptogens with lifestyle dietary habits
Yes.
that can cover the gamut of stressors.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think adaptogens can be really great to take that edge off. And I like what you were saying, that like it takes some time for the body to get up to speed with some of these things and to have
Yeah.
their effects. A lot of times when I work with clients, that's with like any supplement, I usually try to like let them know like this is something like you might have more immediate effect with, and this is something that definitely needs a little bit more time, because like what you're saying, we're definitely
Yeah.
prone to being impatient when it comes to effects of
Yes.
pills.
Myself included. I'm
Exactly.
totally guilty of that. And I have to really check myself to be patient and give things enough time to actually do something for me.
Right.
And that's not been my experience with adaptogens and nervines in particular, but also herbal medicines and natural therapies more broadly take a little bit more time. Now, that being said, like I have people do what I call speed dating and test out a whole bunch of probiotics one after the other. And usually, like, oftentimes I'll see some notable progress within the span of a day or two. Or at least, I should say this. I did that experiment initially because I was trying to fish out what probiotic are you going to super hate, and let's not sell you a bottle of that one, right? Because
Yeah.
I've had those cases where somebody takes a bottle of probiotic home, they take one capsule, and they're like, "I hate you, and I hate this, and I want a refund." I'm like,
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah.
So I started the speed dating with probiotics because I just wanted to avoid that and
Yeah.
people being mad at me. And so you can definitely tell within the span of like a dose or two of a probiotic which ones you're super going to hate.
Yeah.
And there's like caveats. Sometimes you have to push through it, but I try to balance that. But then I was pleasantly surprised when I started doing that a few years ago. In the span of a 2-day trial for the speed dating process, I had so many people come back and say, no, I felt like really good on this one and this one. And that I wasn't anticipating. So I think there are some natural compounds, like perhaps probiotics for some people, maybe some things like prokinetics. There are things that
Yeah.
you'll notice a quick benefit with a span of like a couple of days or maybe a week. But particularly as we're talking about the stress response and hormones just broadly, it takes time.
Yeah, for sure. And I wish that we had more patience, but sometimes we just have no patience. But
Humans are the worst for that.
it's important to be patient with adaptogens is
Yeah.
the takeaway.
Yes, I would say so. And that might be a good place to kind of hang the hat for the day. I don't know if we can end on a more useful note than being patient with the adaptogens.
Yeah.
Heck, we could do,
I also just love the expression hang your hat for the day.
right? Like
Like
that's a wrap,
it
folks.
brings me back to like, I don't know, olden day.
Yeah, which neither of us remember because we're too young to remember. But yeah, it does kind of
Yeah.
conjure an image of like the 1950s of like, hey, honey, I'm home, hanging the
Yeah,
hat.
everyone has their hats.
Yeah, yeah, so I think that was hopefully, I don't know, you guys tell us. Hopefully that was a good conversation and a useful conversation about the stress response, stress chemistry, sympathetic, parasympathetic, vagus nerve, all of that stuff and how it pertains to health more broadly, but also we did focus in on the gut at various points there. But just know it's kind of a big deal. I think if you're alive and you have a pulse in this day and age, you probably have some degree of a stress response that could be better managed. But certainly if you are aware of your stress, then taking steps to manage that is going to be helpful. As always, for those of you on YouTube, if you could comment down below, like the video, subscribe, ring the bell, do whatever the things you do on YouTube are. And if you are on a podcasting app, if you could rate us 5 stars, that would be so helpful and help us reach more people and grow this wonderful podcast.